The founder journey is nuts. It actually requires you more than I think any other type of work in the world to keep growing into a bigger version of yourself. Because it's not a job with deliverables. You're stewarding this living thing. It's just going to keep asking different things of you. And to do that, you can't stay the same person. You're constantly going to feel like an idiot. You're constantly going to be doing things you don't know how to do. You're constantly going to be doing things that terrify you. And that's just really hard.
This is Melanie.
And this is Christian.
You're listening to Follow the Gradient, the weekly podcast with actionable insights about how to build a business while staying sane. If you're like most founders, you've probably wondered at some point, is coaching actually worth it? Or is it just this overhyped, feel-good exercise people talk about on LinkedIn? That question landed straight in our inbox from a longtime listener who wanted to know, how do you even find a great coach? What does great actually look like? And how do you get the most out of it? And how do you actually justify it to your investors? So Christian and I brought on Jake Bornstein. Jake's coached over 150 founders and execs through hypergrowth, pivots, mergers and acquisitions, executive restructurings, complex exits, and the day-to-day challenges of leadership. He started out as an investment associate at a hedge fund, Bridgewater, working directly with its founder, Ray Dalio. But it was a total health collapse in his late 20s that forced him to rethink everything and eventually led him to his work. In our conversation today, we dig into why most startups don't get killed by murder but by suicide, how to spot and stop the subtle ways you sabotage yourself and your org, and what a truly transformative coaching relation looks like when it's not just another box to tick. And by the way, if you also have a burning question in your life as a founder or startup operator, we're currently working on season 4, so send us your ideas at team@followthegradient.io. But now, let's dive into the conversation with Jake. Welcome to the show. So great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? What is your story? What is your connection to scale-ups, founders, and also scale-up operators?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the short version. So started my career in finance. I was at a big hedge fund called Bridgewater. Many people have heard of it. Ray Dalio, the founder's a bit of a character. They have a fairly distinct way of running things. Did that for a number of years on the investment side. So I was working fairly closely with Ray on special projects, building out sort of these systems for modeling how the whole world economy and currency systems worked and things like that. Ended up leaving for a variety of reasons. The part of it was this desire to just like get closer to the ground, right? Get out of the abstractions, get closer to what it was really like to build things, and ended up running this nonprofit doing sort of entrepreneurship acceleration, particularly in sort of community and food spaces. It was sort of a mission-driven nonprofit in that space. I ended up getting really sick. So I had this curveball where in my late 20s, I went through this just absolutely horrific health experience that lasted for a number of years. That could be a whole conversation on its own. But yeah, I basically couldn't work, was in pain all the time, couldn't read, couldn't walk. And the doctors told me it might be forever. And so it really, really sort of broke down everything I knew about who I was. And what saved me in some ways during that time was, a lot of credit to my wife who was there next to me throughout it all. And she sort of kept dragging me to these different meditation courses and facilitation courses and coaching courses and things like that. I went and studied with this wild old man in the middle of the desert who's one of the fathers of sort of internal family systems, parts work, studied all these different interpersonal meditation modalities and discovered that I loved it. It was so much of what I was looking for, sort of just getting to really sit with people in a deeper space and sort of watch the light go on in their eyes. And when my health came back, I was wondering, okay, great. Like ambitious Jake is back. Jake who wanted to, go to the hedge fund and take over the world. He's back. Nice to see you.
Finally.
And yet, what am I going to do with this part of me that actually loves whatever this deeper space is? How do I combine these two? And executive coaching was the answer. I reconnected with the former chief people officer from Bridgewater, and We created a firm doing coaching and consulting, primarily with scale-ups. This was a lot of the kind of New York unicorn scene, and did that for 7 years. Worked with a lot of the folks in that world, from Series A, Series B through to IPO or other kinds of exits. Helped hire and train about 100 other coaches, built out big diagnostic machine and a lot of the business behind it. And 3 years ago, decided to go independent. So that's where we are now.
Thanks for sharing the story. And yes, I would have a ton of other questions about your life, but I think we will postpone that to another episode. Today, we really want to go deep into what is coaching, why is it beneficial for startup people, so to say. But I want to start with a very simple question, because I feel like I get requests from coaches every other day on LinkedIn saying, yeah, I'm a life coach, I'm a whatever coach. So I don't always have the best image of what a coach is. What for you does a great coach actually do for founders trying to scale fast while also trying to stay sane, as we say in our slogan at Follow the Gradient?
Yeah, absolutely. And I get that, with a lot of compassion for the coaches out there trying to figure out how to build their business and do all of that. It's the Wild West out there. So there's a lot of variation in what people actually do. But for founders, look, the founder journey is nuts, right? It actually requires you more than I think any other type of work in the world to keep growing into a bigger version of yourself, right? Because it's not a job with deliverables, right? You might have things you're trying to do at any given point in time, but what you're doing is you're stewarding this living thing. And as that grows and as that changes, it's just going to keep asking different things of you. You're going to have to get over your hangups about talking to customers and really understanding them deeply. You'll have to get over your hangups around trying to do everything and keep everything under your control and learn how to get work done through other people. You'll have to interact with investors with big decisions that involve tons of money. And what's asked of you keeps changing at every step of that journey. And to do that, you can't stay the same person. I think if you look at a lot of the great CEOs, who Bill Gates started out as, who Mark Zuckerberg started out as, who Jeff Bezos started out as, that's not who they ended up as, and it's not who they were along the way. And to keep growing into that bigger version of yourself, you're going to be constantly coming up against your emotional and intellectual blind spots. Constantly. You're constantly going to feel like an idiot. You're constantly going to be doing things you don't know how to do. You're constantly going to be doing things that terrify you. And that's just really hard. It's really easy to just be reactive to that all the time, to either pretend you know all the answers or to go and just ask people for advice and it's not actually useful, but you sort of take it on because you don't know what else to do. And to me, a great coach is that person who keeps helping you grow by facing those blind spots and connecting to that real kernel of what you are growing into in service of this business that you're creating. And that's a special type of relationship, right? So, and I say relationship because I think it actually works best with another person. And it can't really be your board because they have vested interests, and it can't really be other people on your executive team because they're going to be looking at things through their lens, even if it's right and they're good, but it's still going to be about, give me more budget, give me more autonomy, and that will fix everything. And you can't really talk to friends because they don't get it necessarily. And even your partner is going to have all of these vested interests about what does this mean for the relationship and what does this mean for you? And I don't want to see you kill yourself, right? And a coach at their best is the person who is just constantly holding that image of what's possible for you and is willing to say the hard truths that exist outside the edges of what you can see. And I think that's a very special kind of relationship that I don't know how else you get it.
And when we talk about this great coach, you also criticize the standard split of some coaches focus only on inner work, others only on business strategy. What's your diagnostic lens when you start with a founder? How do you decide if the real constraint is really strategic or structural or something inside the founders themselves?
Yeah. So I don't think it's ever one thing, to be clear. It's not like, oh, it's strategic or it's organizational or it's emotional. It's all of them. It's always all of them. They reflect each other, which is part of why I think it's so important to hold all of those lenses at the same time. So in terms of the way that I do it, right, I'm usually looking at the gap between what their intent are and the outcomes they're seeing, and then filling in the blanks on sort of what the misalignments are on the blocks in between. So part of that is hard data, right? What's working, what's not, where are things behind schedule, where are sales not landing, where's churn ticking up in ways you didn't expect, where's CAC staying high when you didn't think it would, where are you behind on the product roadmap, blah, blah, all that, right? And then there's the conversations, right? What are people saying? What are customers saying? What are employees saying? What are investors saying? And a lot of that's going to be noise, but there's always going to be some kind of signal in there about what's really. And then there's the deeper personal part where as we're talking through these problems and I'm hearing how people think about them, you can feel when they're knotted up, right? When it's like tight. It's not, it's tight, right? They're really in some place that doesn't really feel right. Or they're saying something very confidently, but you can hear that it's only half true. They don't really believe it. And that's a type of listening, frankly, like anyone can do it. You can learn how to do that. So maybe I'll give an example, I think, to make this more tangible about what this looks like in practice, right? So this was, last week, someone came to me and sales had stalled, right? Okay, great. Headline, sales stalling. What do I do? So let's look at the pipeline. Where in the pipeline? Okay, they were losing big deals to new competitors and their smaller deals just like weren't filling the gap. Okay, somewhat classic. Well, why were they losing these big deals to new competitors? What was happening? What was being said? What information were they getting? Well, turns out that the product team was building all of these self-serve features for the mid-market rather than sort of the security and analytics features that these enterprises wanted, right? The enterprises kept saying, we want this thing. We really love you. But like, if you don't have these security features, if you don't have these analytics features, we have to go with this competitor that we actually like worse. But they weren't building that. Okay, great. So why? What is going on here? Well, the CEO actually deeply knew that enterprise was the future of the business, right? It's what the core product was built for. It's what he loved. All their best clients were enterprise. They loved it. They loved it more than their competitors. They had some things sort of baked into the DNA of the product that really made it fantastic for these large enterprise clients. And their net retention was ridiculous. Anyone who used them loved it and kept wanting to use more. And they had a muscle for enterprise deployment that they built over years that their newer competitors could not touch. But their CRO didn't have experience going after that. He was someone who had grown with the business and he was way more comfortable with those smaller mid-market deals. And their CPO, right? He just kind of built whatever the sales team told him clients wanted. Oh, and by the way, since the CRO is pushing all of these mid-market deals, what are the sales reps saying they want? Oh, they want self-serve. They want to be easy. They want to be cheap. Like, okay, build us self-serve features, build us self-serve features, build us self-serve features. So now we go through the diagnostic path, right? So you have strategic confusion, right? Who are they building for? What's the real value they offer as a firm? You have organizational confusion because who's dictating the product roadmap? And then all of that is downstream from the CEO who's terrified to replace his CRO. He's terrified to give actual strategic clarity to the org. And the way that he was dealing with that day to day so that he didn't go crazy was that he would just keep dropping in on these big enterprise deals to save the day and be a hero. And he got to feel good and he got to feel like he was saving everything, but he wasn't making the real decisions because under that was this terror that if he was seen publicly as someone who made the wrong call, he would be viewed as a failure forever. And so it was easier not to make any call and just keep being a hero, but it was killing the business.
How do you tackle this? How do you help this person out? Is that some form of insecurity about decision making, about your own role, about a dynamic between the CRO, CPO, and CEO? How do you get out of this?
Yeah, there's a whole box of stuff there, right? And it really depends on the person. You want to be clarifying things at every level, right? And it probably does actually start at that emotional level because otherwise you won't be able to see the rest clearly. In this case, we did get clear on that piece that he knew, which is like enterprise is the future. It's what we do. And he felt that and it was clear and it was true. And we checked that it was true. And then it was actually feeling the fear of it, right? So there's this way in which founders are constantly running, right? They're running from one meeting to another. They're running to do the next thing. They're running to fix the next problem. And you have to do that at some level, but it also means that you never actually feel the thing. And so in this case, it was actually sitting with, okay, you made the wrong call. How is that? What happens? Your investors are pissed. Your employees are pissed. What is that? How does it feel? Where do you feel it in your body? What do you imagine? What comes up? And working through that until it got to this point that he actually was in touch with, there's all of this fear, there's all of that. And it actually matters less to me than building this thing that I know can be built here. I care about that more.
Over which period can such a very strong feeling and also bottleneck that this person is for themselves, like be resolved, so to say? I guess it depends, but can you, like, I don't think you can fix that in one session, so to say.
Totally depends. Yeah, that's really variable. It really depends on the person, where they're at, and in some ways, like how ready they are. I have seen clients have extraordinary breakthroughs in one session, and then, a lot of it is just the details from there. Like, okay, great. What kind of CRO do you need? How are you going to do the transition plan? Okay, what kind of CPO do you need? What is their role going to be? Who are they? What is their mandate going to be? How are they going to report? Like, whatever. Sometimes it takes a long time, right? One of the founders are really smart generally, and they're generally really good at selling things, which means they're really good at selling things to themselves. And so if there is something they don't want to see, they will come up with so many brilliant excuses for, no, but God, I need the CRO in place for the fundraise because, if investors see me do a hot swap right going into the fundraise, they're not going to want to do it. So like maybe I see, and maybe if I just give him a little more direction, he'll do the right thing and this and that. And like, yeah, you can swirl in that for 6 months, a year, but usually we can go faster than that.
You mentioned a point earlier about you constantly have to grow into a different version of yourself and often a bigger version of yourself, right? And that goes back to also the complexity of the business. Said before that the cost of scale is complexity. And many founders are in the beginning in this kind of garage mode. And then at some point, you have to consciously start building a structure, and you need to go out of this romantic feeling of, okay, we are not in 110% hustle mode anymore. We need to build an actual organization. How do you guide founders through this? And how do you help them to transform themselves to make this transition?
So first off, I would never want a founder to stop being romantic. I'm a romantic. I love it. I mean, yeah, great. I want to start first that I think in many ways, one of the reasons founders don't do this is because they think they'll have to give up that romance. They'll have to give up something special. And yeah, things will change. It won't feel the same when it's 150, 200, 500 people as it does when it's, you and your 10 best friends jamming. But you can make something special. It doesn't have to be the same beige bureaucracy that a lot of mediocre companies turn into. You can make really distinct choices about how you're going to run, about how you're going to be set up. And so part of it is actually recognizing that you have that opportunity, that it doesn't have to be this sort of death of something beautiful on the way to scale. Part of this comes down to just a reality check on management. So most founders don't like managing, right? They started their business because they love building, or they love envisioning future possibilities, or they love selling. Some mix of the three. And managing is not why. They did not start their business because they want to manage people all day. That's not what they did. And the way that most founders deal with that is they basically just swing back and forth between abdication and freaking out. So, they'll be like, they like to say this thing like, and this gets reinforced with some of the common wisdom out there of like, oh, if I just hire the right people and I give them the right goals, it's going to be fine. I'm empowering, I'm giving all this autonomy. And they do that. And then the person comes in and then they want to go off in this other direction, and they don't work well with the other executives. And it's not actually aligned with what they're trying to do, and things underperform. And then the founder gets frustrated, and then they come in and they try to tell them every single thing to do and micromanage the whole thing. And you just swing back and forth between that. And meanwhile, you sort of go on this carousel through executives where the next one's going to be the silver bullet, and then they're not. And you just do that forever. You can kind of make that work, by the way, like up until generally the point where you have managers of managers. That's where this gets really destructive. It's like somewhere around 50 to 150 people. It depends a bit on the type of the business. But the way through this, right, I think it starts with just letting go of this fantasy that somehow you're going to find people good enough to read your mind. Like every founder sort of holds that fantasy. It just let it go. It's gone. It's not going to happen. And even if you find someone who's so good that they do read your mind at the next stage of the business, they won't be able to. There's just no one who can do that. So everything then becomes about context setting. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what I need from you to make it happen. These are the key principles by which I need you to make decisions. And starting to just reiterate that over and over and over again. And that can actually be sort of romantic. There's a way in which you're like reiterating the core spirit of the business back to people over and over and over again. And that doesn't have to be this sort of dull bureaucracy management thing that I think a lot of founders are scared of. And when they actually start getting comfortable saying, nope, like this is what I want to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what I really need from you to make it happen. They find that actually that can be sometimes fun. And at minimum, it actually is enlivening to something in them. Because they go from all the joy is in the doing of it to actually the joy is in sort of sharing this with others. And that is something that I think founders can grow into.
So
One
if
thing
I hear you right,
oh, sorry.
it's
Please, go for it.
communication, right? It's communication.
That's great. It's not. Communication is the last step. It's actually real clarity. Because when you're in that doing mode, you kind of just have it all in your head in this sort of messy thing that you sort of intuit your way through. And the challenge isn't really communication. Like anyone can say stuff. The challenge is actually getting clear about what you're trying to do and what you need from people. That's the hard part. It's getting really clear on your intent. What are we building here? What do we need in this era of the business? What are we moving towards? What is the environment that we're operating in? And what do I need from each of these functions and from each of the people in those functions to make that happen? And that's an act more of deep visualization than it is communication. The communication is easy if you've done that part.
Yeah, it's a super interesting point, because what I was sometimes thinking is you have so many people, which totally makes sense, right? Who are going out there and saying, okay, I'm going to disrupt the business, which I obviously have no idea about, which has a lot of advantages, right? Because you can come in with a fresh mind when you look at things. On the other hand, you have no idea about your business, right? In the sense of you don't know the sector, you don't know the clients, you don't know how they think, you don't know all the nitty-gritty details and the problems which they have. And then I think what sometimes happens is that people successfully fundraise because they have that sort of vision, and the VCs know, okay, there is something, I know there is something, and I'm going to trust that person to deliver on that vision. But then obviously you realize as you go through the years, oh my God, I don't know enough, right? Like every time I talk to a client, they say like 100 things I've never heard. And even after 2 years, I still discover the more things I know, the more questions I have. And I think that this is normal, but then you kind of need to do that step to acknowledge to yourself, my vision was only the vision, the rough idea I had like in all my naivete 3 years ago. And I did manage to sell that vision to someone, which is super good. But now I kind of need to sit down and ask more questions and find out more. And I kind of need to hold my, like, I need to keep my investors happy, right? I can't obviously tell them, or maybe I can. I don't know what I'm doing, but I kind of need to go that new step and dive deeper. Sometimes I have the feeling you need to ask more questions to get clarity. And maybe the framework you're operating in with the employees, the investors, and all that pressure holds you back. That is just sometimes what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah. And I think there's something really profound in what you're saying, which is like there's these sort of two ditches on the side of the road, right? Which you're describing, which is either to be acceptable to my investors and to myself and to my employees, I have to know everything, right? That vision that I put in the pitch deck is exactly how it's going to go, which is of course never how it goes. Or I know nothing. I'm flailing. Like, help, please come in and save me, senior leader from other company who will somehow know everything about how to do my business. And it's just neither of those are true. Like, you know some things. You have a perspective. You built something. There's some seed of an idea that you built the vision around. There's a perspective you have on the market. There's a way you think about building. There's a way you think about how to engage people. There's something in you that is unique. And you know some things about what you're going to do. But then you have to create a container in which you can fill in the rest of the blanks. Right. So even being able to say, okay, these are the specific things I don't know. I know these pain points for clients. I don't know these, or I don't know how to stack rank them. Okay, sales team, you are now actually my discovery team. These are the hypotheses that we need to investigate. I want you going into every sales call, driving on these hypotheses. And by the way, like, feel free to experiment, like come up with new scripts, come up with new questions, but they have to be oriented towards figuring out these hypotheses. And then we're going to be meeting together weekly to figure out what we're learning. Right. And so there's that way of interacting with the unknown where you're still able to give people a frame within which to act.
You described the very tough path founders have to take? Maybe as a very open question, where do you see most people slip on that path?
Let's see. I mean, there's a number of places. Conflict aversion, I think, is the biggest. That's the place where I really see people run into problems. I'd say every CEO I work with, or nearly every CEO I work with, is just terrified at some level to upset their team, their co-founder, their board, their early customers. And so most choices sort of end up subconsciously being, okay, what can I do that everyone will basically be okay with? And the answer to that, of course, is nothing. There's nothing you can do that everyone will be okay with. And then it builds up and founders either start sort of lashing out and making big changes reactively, or they're stuck making those big changes like right in the moment where the company is most fragile. And that really damages things. It's sort of like a Greek tragedy, right? You end up creating the thing you're afraid of by trying to avoid it.
And that is maybe also linked to what you've written on your website. You quote that 99% of startups die from suicide, not murder. What are some of the most common self-inflicted wounds you see once companies start scaling beyond 50 or 100 people on a personal level, but really also maybe from a structural level?
It really, I've been using the word intent a lot. I do think that's where it starts. I have a basic framework in the back of my mind where I'm always thinking, okay, is there a clear intent? Is there a clear form that the business is taking aligned with that intent? And then are people doing it? Are they executing in a way that is aligned with that? So lack of clear intent just kills people. We've talked about it a little bit before, but it's like if you're disconnected from the real value you're creating, that's an external thing. If you're disconnected from what you're personally inspired to create, then you just end up doing a bunch of things that aren't actually helpful, right? And it's funny because people think they'll have an intent, but it's not really what they intend to do, right? It'll be, I want to have $1 billion exit, or I want to have this big raise, and those are outcomes. They're not what you want to do, right? And this leads to really bad decisions because, for example, you end up trying to run all of these options because you don't actually trust your core product or your core insight. And you just spread yourself really thin, not because you're even trying to discover anything, but just because you're afraid of failure. The things that I've seen a couple of companies go from, being worth $1 billion on paper to selling for cents on the dollar. And in those cases, it was often the case of like bad mergers. Like that kills people. And it is often this thing where, you just lost sight of what you're even trying to do. And you go and you acquire a company because you've made all these promises about what the growth numbers are going to be. And you're like, okay, can I just fill it in this way without having to actually solve the hard problem? And it just kills people, even if the deal looks good on paper. Bad raises, right? Again, if you're not clear about what you want to do, and instead this is about, I want my family to think I'm a real entrepreneur. I want my name in the paper so that I feel better about myself. People go out and they go for these monster raises that put them in a bind because then there are all of these expectations that they're unable to meet. And then they're in this situation where, okay, great. Now I have to, do I go and do this down round? Do I keep throwing things at the wall to try to hit these growth expectations that I'm not really able to hit? And that just kills businesses. And again, it all is downstream from this real lack of clear intent of like, why are you doing this? What are you trying to do? What actually lights you up? What is the real value that you're bringing as a business? That then ripples through into sort of the form that the business takes, right? Where they don't really then build the org for what needs to be done. I'd mentioned before sort of the best practice trap, right? And so you get this thing, right, where people, because they're not really clear on what they're trying to do, they're not really clear on how the business needs to look to do it. And so they'll copy org charts from other companies, right? Or put in these sort of elaborate OKR rituals that just turn into busy work and no one actually looks at them except once a quarter. Or they hire big company execs to help save the day or whatever it is. Or they just try to do the best they can with the org they have, which is usually like a bunch of early stage employees who are good ICs, but have no idea how to actually manage other people or design an org for achieving them, right? Versus being like, this is exactly what we need to do. Okay, we're a deep tech, deep research organization. Great. This exec team is all about deep research trade-offs and resource allocation against that. Okay, we have a small number of high revenue, high complexity buyers. I am hiring one person who just knows that space better than anyone, and I will do anything to make them succeed. And all of the other noise, all of the other things about like, maybe you can try this to license the technology, and maybe you can do this mini product experiment. Like, I'm dropping it. I'm building the org around this basic intent.
it all sounds so logical, and everyone, I think, would say, yes, absolutely. You need to really figure out why you're there, like your raison d'être and everything. But how do you help founders actually cut away all these initiatives, roles, pet projects that are out there and are out of alignment, especially when it means having hard conversations with your co-founders or also investors?
So this is where it is logical, but we just don't have access to logic all that often. And that's why it does in some ways start with the personal, with the psychological, with the emotional, because that is actually where our decisions come from. A really interesting thing on the science side of this, that actually when people get brain damage that damages some of the emotional centers of their brain, they're completely unable to make decisions. They can tell you all of the analysis about what the pros and cons are and what makes sense and things like that. They literally can't execute. So sidebar. In terms of how to actually do that, yeah, it goes back to the example I gave you before, where you actually have to connect to the place that is solid in them, where they can move with clarity, even in the face of fear. And that means, it sounds corny, but it's like they have to feel the things they don't want to feel. They have to hear from the parts of themselves that they don't want to hear from. I can give an example. So, one recent client that I was working with, he was struggling a lot with ambition in particular. He came from an immigrant background. A lot of his self-image was really bound up in being sort of this humble, down-to-earth guy. I don't care about the fancy things. I don't care about the big splashy profiles and all of that. But that wasn't really true. It was like an image that he was trying to hold up. And there was this other part of him that was constantly comparing himself to others, constantly craving attention, constantly craving to be on the big podcasts and the big panels and be sort of a public figure. And he was deeply ashamed of it, right? This stuff would be running in his head and it just made him feel terrible about himself. And then he would confuse the team, because half the time he would be like, okay, we got to stay simple. We got to focus on revenue. We have to build deliberately. And then a big investor would come and start talking about this huge potential raise, and let's build this sidecar, and we're going to set it up to do a new venture that's, based on your existing product line, and all these new things they'd build and the rock stars that they could hire to raise the profile of the company. And he would swing back and forth between them. Like literally half the time he'd be telling the team, like, heads down, keep it simple, self-funding. And another half the time he'd be saying, okay, oh my God, I just had this conversation and we got to prepare for this big raise, and like, da, 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 da. And to actually sit with him and have him speak this part that was just, yeah, I want attention. I want to build something that's changing the world. I want to be seen and acknowledged for it. And to actually let that part speak, to say what it wanted without any shame, to accept that that's a part of himself, and to actually feel that without it necessarily meaning anything, it was huge. Like it unlocked something in him, because when you have that shame thing, when you push something aside, it always comes back in. It always comes back in to find a way to do what it wants anyway. And so when it stopped being this internal fight, like something clicked for him. Because actually, yeah, he did care about keeping things simple. That was true. That was part of him. And he was also ambitious. Great. Okay. And when he felt that, he actually realized he didn't actually want to be a public figure. He didn't actually want to start this radical side venture that would distract the team. But he did want to raise earlier and bigger. And he did want to scale their core product faster because he saw the possibility there. And he basically went back to the big investor and said, no, thank you. I don't want this sort of crazy thing that you're suggesting, but I do want a smaller raise to expand my core offering. Are you up for that? Yes, they did. And then he went to the team and he said, this is what we're doing. And they were like, oh, thank God. You're actually giving us clarity. This is amazing. And then he went and hired unbelievable people, but they weren't like the rock stars that, oh my God, you got to the product officer from XYZ super fancy company. It was just people who were actually unbelievably good at exactly the thing he needed to do. And so again, all of those things are logical, but they were all gated on him being able to get past the shame, being able to accept that he has these multiple parts, that they want what they want. And when the fight dies down, you can actually go for what's true.
One burning question that I think everyone now has, that has listened and maybe doesn't have yet a coach, but is thinking like, okay, I absolutely need a sparring partner like you, Jake. How do people actually get a great coach? Of course, they can reach out to you, but you're also just one person and maybe your partner. And Because I've often heard from other founder peers, hey, this is a good coach. But especially for people who might not have people in their network that already are working with great coaches, where do you find one? And then maybe more important, how do you vet whether this is really the right one for your current stage and how you do things?
The rough answer on this one is like, yeah, you probably need good referrals.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you just Google it. It's
No.
just, there's so much noise out there. I honestly don't have a good answer for how you'd sort through that. It is mostly personal referrals where people get good coaches. In terms of how to figure out if a coach is good, I think two things. First is, and you hear me talking about clear intent and clear visualization. So start with clear intent and clear visualization. There are multiple kinds of coaches out there. I think having some clarity about what you're going for helps. So yeah, some coaches are really, truly just all about the inner game. They're about helping you overcome your fears, operating from flow. They really don't know that much about business or even care. And but maybe that's your thing. Maybe it's just, you are just on the edge of burnout every day and you feel like you're dying and you just need help. Great. Go find that person. Maybe it's more about structure. There's some coaches who are really focused on accountability. And if you just feel like you're a chaotic whirlwind all day and you just want someone who's going to hold you accountable and talk about your goals every week and give you a bunch of tools, great. Go get that. I do think if you are on this founder journey where you are really trying to do something great and growing into something bigger, you want someone who can do all of it with you. And then you want to see, do they get it? Do they get what I'm building? Do they ask good questions? Do they get where I'm at? Do I feel seen by this person? And the feeling that comes out of that, the internal experience, is really you should be looking to feel two things, which is you should feel both clearer and more excited coming out of your very first conversation with them than in some ways you've ever felt before. Something clicks and there's energy, your whole body is tingling at some level. And you should feel absolutely terrified. If this person isn't bothering you, if they're not challenging you, if they're not saying things that you don't really want to hear, then they're probably also not the right person.
Jake, this was a super inspiring conversation, and I think we would like to keep going for hours. For the moment, we have to end here. Last question for our audience. Where can people follow you, your thinking, or get in touch with you?
You can email me at jake@studiometis.co, or you can follow our Substack at The Last Manager.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And this was another episode of our Follow the Gradient podcast.
And now we would love to hear from you. How did you like it? What should we improve? Do you have any suggestions, ideas, or dream podcast guests? Please let us know.
Thank you and see you again next week.